9 minutes isn't long, but it's enough to make a bot managing $390 million freeze like a statue. I didn't hack anything. I simply withdrew a signature they'd taken for granted. They told me to do less, so I did exactly that. I stopped saving them. When the clock hit 0, every order stopped breathing and I finally exhaled. The revenge wasn't in what I destroyed, it was in what I chose not to maintain. The most elegant kills in corporate warfare aren't explosions, they're systems quietly refusing to wake up because someone forgot to say please. My name is Riley Hart, and until 3 weeks ago, I was the Director of Risk Architecture at Voltark Markets in Greyhaven, Illinois, 34 years old, MIT graduate, holder of every certification that matters in financial systems. The kind of credentials that should have meant something when Graham Kessler, our CFO, decided to erase me from existence. It started with my name disappearing from the ops meeting calendar. Not canceled, just gone. Like I'd never been scheduled at all. When I showed up anyway that Tuesday morning at 10:30. The conference room was already full of what Kessler called his innovation fellows, 20-somethings in designer sneakers, who laughed when someone mentioned risk coefficients. "Oh, Riley," Kessler said, not looking up from his tablet. "We're pivoting the meeting focus, more forward-thinking, less—" He waved his hand vaguely in my direction. "Process-heavy." I took notes in silence, watching them discuss modifications to Aegis 390, our flagship trading bot, managing $390 million in exposure. Every line of code they celebrated. Every algorithm they praised, it all sat on infrastructure I'd built at 2 a.m. while they were posting LinkedIn updates about disrupting finance. CEO Lyle Porter was there too, projecting slides about exponential growth trajectories and frictionless execution. He had this peculiar talent for being allergic to the word compliance, while simultaneously depending on it to keep us from imploding. When someone mentioned updating our risk protocols, he actually said, "Let's not overthink the plumbing when we're building rockets." The real signal came when Kessler stood to wrap up. "Going forward, we need everyone to focus on their core competencies. Some of us need to do more." He looked at his innovation fellows. "And some of us," his eyes found me, "need to do less." Do less. The phrase hung in the air like a diagnosis. I'd spent 3 years building the nervous system that kept their rocket from exploding, and now they wanted me to do less. I smiled and wrote it down in my notebook. Do less. GK directive. Dated it. Underlined it twice. They didn't know I'd embedded myself so deeply into Voltark's architecture that removing me wasn't like pulling out a brick, it was like trying to extract bones from a living body. Every risk management protocol, every compliance checkpoint, every automated safety mechanism bore my fingerprints in ways they'd never bothered to document. The meeting ended with handshakes and promises of exciting changes ahead. I walked back to my office, still mine, for now, and pulled up the system architecture I'd designed. 3,000 hours of work spread across 5 monitors, the risk orchestrator humming along, managing permissions, tokens, throttles, keeping Aegis 390 from doing anything catastrophic. They wanted me to do less fine. I'd give them exactly what they asked for. I opened my personal laptop and logged into Heartline Compliance LLC, the single-member company I'd maintained since my consulting days. Still active, still holding certain licenses, still named on a few critical documents that Voltark's legal team had been too busy to update. The genius of precise compliance isn't in creating disruption, it's in following the rules so flawlessly that the very people who wrote them get caught in their own web. I started documenting everything, every system dependency, every API connection, every service account, every digital signature requirement, not to save them, to prove I'd done my job when they inevitably came looking for someone to blame. Graham Kessler wanted me to do less. I was about to show him what less really looked like when it came from someone who'd been doing everything. The risk orchestrator lived in what I called the engine room, not a physical space, but a digital architecture so complex that most engineers got vertigo just looking at the documentation. I'd built it over 3 years, layer by layer, like sedimentary rock formed from countless late nights and canceled weekends. At its core was a simple principle: every significant trading decision needed multiple signatures, not just from humans, but from systems, token validation, throttle management, exposure limits, all choreographed by a conductor that never slept. The beauty was in the dependencies. Pull one thread wrong, and instead of unraveling, the whole thing would lock down into dormant compliance lockout. I designed it that way after watching too many cowboys try to bypass safety protocols at my previous firm. 3 years ago, during our last license renewal, I'd inserted something I called the Continuity of Risk Oversight Clause. Buried on page 47 of the technical appendix, it stated that any change in risk control ownership required a formal handover process. Without proper transition documentation and certified sign-off, the orchestrator would interpret it as a potential security breach and freeze all critical operations. The original operating authority was registered to Heartline Compliance LLC, my company. It seemed like a formality at the time. Voltark's legal team had bigger fish to fry, and besides, I was permanent, essential, irreplaceable. Why waste time on paperwork for something that would never matter? I kept what I called a living ledger version histories. Cryptographic hashes, timestamps for every significant change. The API dependency map alone looked like a subway system for a city that never stopped growing. 23 external services, 47 internal microservices, and over 300 individual connection points, each with its own authentication requirements. The prime brokers, Goldman, Morgan Stanley, Citadel, they all required specific signature protocols. Not just passwords or two-factor authentication, but cryptographic keys that rotated every 72 hours, validated against a certificate chain that traced back to Heartline Compliance LLC. I pulled up the service account roster, 15 critical accounts, all created under my administrative authority. The documentation showed my name, my timestamps, my digital signature on every creation certificate, but more importantly, it showed the licensing authority, Heartline Compliance, not Voltark Markets. It was like I'd been building a house for someone else, but never transferred the deed to the land it sat on. The integration with Aegis 390 was particularly elegant. The bot could trade billions, but only if the risk orchestrator validated each decision against a complex matrix of rules: market volatility, position concentration, counterparty exposure, all filtered through my system before a single order could execute. The bot was the brain, but I controlled the nervous system. I opened the administrative console and navigated to the configuration management system. Every change required a license signature, a digital certificate that proved the modifier had authority to alter risk parameters. For 3 years, that had been me. Every update, every patch, every optimization carried my signature like an artist signing their work. The terminal glowed with status messages, all green, all healthy, all dependent on a single certificate authority that no one at Voltark actually controlled. I documented everything in a new repository, encrypted and time-stamped, not sabotage evidence, proof that the system was working exactly as designed, exactly as documented, exactly as they'd approved in countless meetings where they'd nodded along without really listening. The most powerful position in any organization isn't the one with the biggest title. It's the one that controls the infrastructure everyone else takes for granted. They thought I was plumbing. They were about to learn I was the water supply. That night, I backed up everything to 3 separate locations: the full architecture, the dependency maps, the service accounts, the certificate chains, my insurance policy. Wrapped in encryption, they'd need my cooperation to unlock. They wanted me to do less. I was about to do exactly that. And when the music stopped, they'd finally understand the difference between the person playing the instruments and the person who built the orchestra hall. The transition meeting was scheduled for a Thursday at 3 p.m. HR Director Brenda Pike had sent the invitation with that corporate cheerfulness that made terminations sound like promotions. Discussion of your evolving role at Voltark was the subject line, the kind of phrasing that would make Orwell proud. Pike's office smelled like vanilla candles and looked like a furniture catalog, everything beige and inoffensive. She had my separation package already printed, bound in a navy folder with the Voltark logo embossed in silver. 20 pages of legalese that essentially said, "Take this money and disappear quietly." "We're calling it a strategic restructuring," Pike said, sliding the folder across her desk. "Your position is being absorbed into the innovation team structure. Graham feels this will create better synergies." I read every line while she fidgeted with her phone. The severance was generous 6 months' salary, continued health benefits, even a clause about positive references, page after page of standard corporate coverage. What interested me was the checklist on page 18, the termination procedures. Badge return check, equipment return check, password reset check, access revocation check, but there it was. Or rather, wasn't no line item for certified continuity sign-off. No mention of transferring the risk orchestrator's licensing authority. No acknowledgement that Heartline Compliance LLC even existed in their ecosystem. "I'll need a complete copy of my personnel file," I said, signing each page with deliberate precision, "including all technical documentation I've submitted." Pike looked confused. "That's unusual." "It's my right under Illinois employment law." I smiled the way you smile at a funeral, respectful, contained, final. "I'll also need written confirmation that all separation procedures have been completed according to Voltark's compliance protocols." She made a phone call. 20 minutes later, I had a banker's box of documents and a flash drive with my complete digital personnel record, everything stamped, dated, and officially certified. "Is there anything else?" Pike asked, eager to end this. I pulled out my laptop and logged into the Risk Orchestrator's administrative panel. "I need to update the system to reflect my status change." "Oh, that won't be necessary. It will handle..." Section 12.4 of the Risk Management Protocol requires the departing risk officer to personally update their status. I turned the screen toward her. "Would you like to violate documented procedure on my last day?" She waved me on, already composing the email that would announce my departure in the vaguest possible terms. I navigated to the configuration management system and uploaded a new policy file. Simple, clean, completely within my authority, any modification to core risk systems without a valid license signature would trigger dormant compliance lockout after a 72-hour grace period. The system would warn, wait, then lock. Not a virus, not malware, just a configuration that said if someone tries to alter critical systems without proper authorization, assume it's a breach and protect the infrastructure. Exactly the kind of safeguard I'd been hired to implement. The update deployed instantly. In the logs, it would show as routine maintenance, the kind of thing I'd done hundreds of times. The signature Riley Hart, Heartline Compliance LLC, valid license holder. I closed the laptop and stood. "Oh, one more thing. Who's taking over my technical responsibilities?" "Sky Harlow from the innovation team. Graham says they're brilliant with systems." Sky Harlow, 26, Stanford dropout. Thought documentation was for people who couldn't code. I'd met them once at a team lunch where they'd explained how true engineers didn't need safety rails. "They'll need this," I said, handing Pike a single sheet of paper. At the top, Critical Risk Orchestrator information. Below that, License Authority Heartline Compliance LLC. For transfer procedures, consult Continuity of Risk Oversight Clause, Section 47.3.b of the 2022 Renewal Agreement. Pike glanced at it, saw technical terms, and filed it away immediately. It would sit in that box until someone realized they needed it. By then, it would be too late. I walked out of Voltark Markets at 4:23 p.m., carrying my personal items in a cardboard box like a cliché from a movie. Behind me, the Risk Orchestrator hummed along, running new configuration, starting its 72-hour countdown. They'd removed my name from meetings, my access from systems, my existence from their future, but they'd forgotten to ask the only question that mattered: who actually owned the keys to the kingdom they'd built their empire on. In 72 hours, they'd have their answer. Back in my home office, I made one final adjustment to the Risk Orchestrator's heartbeat protocol. The heartbeat was the system's way of checking its own pulse every 60 seconds. It verified that all components were functioning within acceptable parameters. I modified the validation logic with surgical precision. If the system detected core modifications or bypass attempts without a valid license signature, it wouldn't just log the violation anymore. It would escalate to compliance freeze mode. Not immediately, that would be suspicious. Instead, it would reduce the grace period by 10% for each violation detected. What started as 72 hours could shrink to minutes if someone got aggressive with their changes. The code was clean, elegant even. No malicious payloads, no data destruction, no hidden backdoors. Just a simple rule: if you don't have permission, you don't get to play. Every token would expire. Every administrative request would be denied. Every automated process would halt. The system would preserve everything: data, logs, transaction history, but access would require the risk integrity key, which could only be generated by the licensed authority. I transferred administrative control of the license to Heartline Compliance LLC exclusively, then locked the registry with a cryptographic seal that would take quantum computers years to crack. Every action was logged, hashed, and added to an immutable audit chain. If anyone ever questioned my actions, I could prove I'd followed every protocol, honored every security measure, done exactly what I'd been trained to do: protect the system from unauthorized changes. My phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. Sky Harlow. Hey Riley, quick question about the risk orchestrator. I'm trying to update the latency thresholds, but it keeps asking for something called a license signature. The documentation mentions Heartline Compliance LLC. Is that some legacy thing I can bypass? I almost felt sorry for them, almost. That's the licensing authority for risk modifications, I explained patiently. It's part of the continuity protocols we established in 2022. There should be transfer documentation in the handover materials. I didn't get any handover materials. Graham said you'd built everything to be self-explanatory. Self-explanatory. 3 years of architecture that could fill textbooks, and they expected it to be self-explanatory. Check with legal. They should have the renewal agreement from 2022. Section 47.3b covers the transfer procedures. Can't you just give me access? Graham wants this done by morning. I'm no longer a VoltArc employee. Sky, that would be a violation of my separation agreement, but the process is all documented. You just need to follow the proper channels. They hung up without saying goodbye. I pulled up the system monitors on my personal dashboard. Yes, I still had read access through publicly available APIs. The orchestrator was already logging attempts. 17 modification attempts in the past hour, all rejected. Each rejection reduced the grace period by 6 hours. They were burning through their time like amateurs at a poker table, raising every hand without checking their cards. At 1:13 a.m., I received an automated notification from the orchestrator. Someone had tried to create a new administrative account using root access. The system classified it as a critical violation. Grace period reduced by 12 hours. They now had less than 18 hours before complete lockdown. I documented everything in my personal log, backing it up to 3 separate cloud services, not to gloat, to protect myself. When this went sideways, they'd look for someone to blame, and I wanted a perfect record showing I'd done nothing wrong. I'd configured a security system to protect itself. I'd transferred my responsibilities according to my employment terms. I'd even tried to help when asked. The beauty of the setup wasn't in its complexity, it was in its legitimacy. Every fail-safe I'd activated was part of the original design specifications. Approved by Kessler himself in quarterly reviews he'd barely skimmed. Every restriction was documented in security audits that Porter had signed without reading. They'd authorized their own lockout years ago. They just hadn't bothered to understand what they were signing. By 2:30 a.m., the modification attempts had stopped. Either Sky had given up, or someone smarter had realized they were making things worse. The grace period stood at 14 hours and counting down. I closed my laptop and went to bed. Tomorrow, or rather, later today, Graham Kessler would learn what doing less really meant when it came from someone who'd been holding up the entire ceiling. The risk orchestrator hummed along in the digital ether, following its protocols perfectly, protecting $390 million in assets from anyone who didn't have permission to touch them. including the people who thought they owned them. The cracks started showing up in Voltark's Slack channels, screenshots forwarded to me by former colleagues who knew I'd appreciate the poetry of it all. Anyone else getting weird latency on order execution, 17 seconds to place a simple limit order, help. Dashboard refresh taking 47 seconds. Already restarted everything twice, #tech support. Why is the throttle oscillating between 5% and 90%? Aegis is acting drunk, urgent. The beautiful thing about complex systems is that they fail in complex ways. When you can't update core parameters, you start getting drift. Tolerances that should be adjusted daily remain static. Buffers that should expand and contract stay frozen. The system keeps running, but like a piano slowly going out of tune, every note starts sounding just a little bit wrong. A junior developer named Marcus tried to be clever. He attempted to refactor the order handler to bypass the orchestrator's validation layer. 4 hours later, he posted, "Does anyone understand what language the risk system is speaking? It keeps sending me responses in what looks like Mandarin but isn't confused." It wasn't Mandarin. It was the orchestrator's way of handling unauthorized requests, returning error messages in a rotating set of Unicode blocks that technically satisfied the response requirement but were completely useless. I'd implemented that after a pen test showed our error messages were too informative for potential attackers. Sales started complaining that their promises to clients were failing. Told Berkshire we could handle their flow, but system says we're at capacity when we're only at 30% utilization. Client escalation. The capacity wasn't about server resources, it was about risk limits that hadn't been updated in 5 days. Markets had moved, volatilities had shifted, but the orchestrator was using stale parameters because no one could update them without triggering another violation. The prime broker notification started at 3:22 p.m. Goldman Sachs Securities, please update your API credentials. Timeout threshold exceeded. Morgan Stanley Prime Brokerage Authentication Token expires in 8 hours. Manual refresh required. Citadel Connect unusual pattern detected in order flow. Please confirm system integrity. Each message was forwarded up the chain with increasing panic. The innovation team scrambled, but they were trying to fix a Formula One engine with kitchen utensils. They understood code, but not the intricate web of relationships between systems. The careful balance of permissions and protocols that kept everything humming. An ex-colleague, Priya from operations, texted me, "Your code has a vibe. It's like it knows we're not you." She wasn't wrong. I'd built the system to be suspicious of sudden changes in access patterns. When someone who'd never touched certain modules suddenly started hammering them with requests, the orchestrator didn't just log it, it adapted its responses, became less cooperative, more Byzantine in its requirements. By 4 p.m., the main trading floor looked like a war room. I knew because someone was live tweeting from inside. CFO just asked why we can't just turn it off and on again, had Voltark drama. Someone suggested calling AWS support. For our internal risk system, I'm dying #tech fail. Director of Engineering just admitted he doesn't know what Heartline Compliance LLC is, mystery. The chart aesthetics remained perfect green lines, smooth curves, all the visual indicators of health, but underneath, the machinery was grinding, orders were processing, but slowly, trades were executing, but inefficiently. The bot was making money, but leaving millions on the table because it couldn't optimize its strategies without updating risk parameters. Porter sent out an all-hands email at 5:43 p.m. Minor technical adjustments underway, all systems operational, full performance to resume shortly. Translation: we have no idea what's wrong, but we can't admit it. The grace period was down to 6 hours. Every attempt to fix one problem created 2 more. They were rearranging deck chairs while the ship developed new leaks they couldn't even see yet. Someone leaked an internal message from Kessler. Find out everything about this Heartline compliance. I want to know who owns it, who runs it, and why the hell our entire risk system depends on it. The answer was sitting in Pike's filing cabinet, on a single sheet of paper that nobody had bothered to read. But they'd figure it out eventually. Probably around the time the grace period hit 0, and Aegis 390 discovered it couldn't execute a single trade without permission from a company owned by the person they'd told to do less. The market closed at 4 p.m., but Voltark's problems were just beginning. In 6 hours, they'd learned the difference between owning a car and owning the keys to it. The investor meeting was scheduled for 11:30 a.m. Eastern. Porter had been polishing his narrative for weeks, a story about exponential growth, revolutionary AI trading, and the future of quantitative finance. What he needed was Aegis 390 performing at peak capacity, pushing volume, demonstrating the raw power of their innovation-first approach. What he got instead was Kessler at 7:45 a.m., demanding the engineering team remove all throttles for the demonstration. "I don't care about your protocols." Kessler's voice carried through the glass walls of the executive conference room. "We need to show 30% volume increase by 11. Make it happen." The innovation team tried. They really did. Some bright spark decided to rebuild the order validation service from scratch, bypassing the risk orchestrator entirely. They pushed it to production at 9:17 a.m. without a license signature. The orchestrator logged it as a critical system violation. Grace period reduced by 4 hours. They now had less than 2 hours before complete lockdown. Legal finally woke up. Nora Whitcomb, the senior counsel who'd been at Voltark since the beginning, arrived at 9:30 carrying a banker's box that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. She pulled out the 2022 renewal agreement, 48 pages held together with a binder clip, Post-it notes jutting out like yellow teeth. "Found it," she announced to the war room that had formed in the main conference space. "Page 47, Section 3, Subsection B, Continuity of Risk Oversight Clause." She read it aloud to a room that had gone cemetery quiet. "Any modification to core risk management systems requires validated signature from the designated license holder. In the event of personnel transition, a formal handover process must be completed, including documented knowledge transfer, certified sign-off from departing officer, and transfer of license authority to incoming personnel. Failure to complete this process will result in automatic system protection protocols to prevent unauthorized access to critical infrastructure." Kessler's face went through several shades of red. "Who's the license holder?" Whitcomb flipped through her notes. "Heartline Compliance, LLC, registered to Riley Hart." The room erupted, 20 voices talking over each other, keyboards clattering, phones ringing. Someone pulled up the Illinois Secretary of State website, confirming that Heartline Compliance was a valid LLC. Single member, formed 6 years ago, active status, registered agent Riley Hart. "Get Hart on the phone," Porter commanded. "We fired her," someone said quietly. "I know we fired her. Get her anyway." My phone started buzzing at 10:05 a.m. Kessler, Porter, Pike, Whitcomb, numbers I didn't recognize. I let them all go to voicemail while I sat in a coffee shop downtown, watching the countdown on my laptop. 1 hour. 12 minutes until compliance freeze. Sky Harlow tried one more fix at 10:28. They attempted to roll back the entire system to a snapshot from last week, before my configuration changes. Smart move. Except the orchestrator treated unauthorized rollbacks as the highest level violation. Grace period eliminated. Compliance freeze mode imminent. The war room's Slack channel exploded. "Stop touching anything. Who authorized that rollback? System showing T-9 minutes. What happens at 0? Porter called me directly at 10:51. I answered on the third ring. "Riley, we need your help. I'm no longer a Voltark employee. Lyle, my separation agreement was very clear about." "Cut the crap. What do you want?" "Nothing. You told me to do less. I'm doing less. This is extortion. This is compliance. Your own legal team can explain the difference." Whitcomb's voice came through the speaker. "Ms. Hart, we're prepared to discuss consulting arrangements." "Are you asking me to violate my separation agreement? Because that sounds like you're asking me to violate my separation agreement." "We're asking you to help us maintain system stability," she said carefully. "The system is perfectly stable. It's about to enter compliance freeze mode, which will protect all assets from unauthorized access. That's not instability. That's the system working exactly as designed. The investor meeting. Starts in 39 minutes. Good luck with your narrative. I hung up. My phone immediately started ringing again. I turned it off. On my laptop, the countdown reached 60 seconds, somewhere in Greyhaven, Illinois, in a glass tower overlooking the lake. Some of the smartest financial engineers in the country were about to learn what happens when you tell the person holding your infrastructure together to do less. The countdown hit 30 seconds. The investor video call was probably starting. Portfolios being screen shared, promises being made about revolutionary technology and game-changing returns. 10 seconds. 5. 0. At 11:21 a.m. Eastern Time, every screen in Voltark's war room displayed the same message. Compliance freeze mode, active, T-0900. 9 minutes, not to fix it 9 minutes until total system lockdown. The first order Aegis 390 tried to execute hit a wall immediately. Risk integrity token invalid. The bot, programmed to retry failed operations, sent the same order again. Denied, again, denied. Within 15 seconds, it had burned through its retry limit and entered a hold state. "Override it," Kessler shouted. With what credentials? Sky's fingers flew across the keyboard. My admin access just got downgraded to read-only. Everyone's did. The countdown continued 8 minutes, 30 seconds. Porter's laptop was projecting to the investor meeting, his screen showing Aegis 390's dashboard in real time. The activity graph that should have been spiking with trades was flatlining. The volume counter stopped incrementing. The P&L froze at its last calculated value. "Technical difficulties," Porter said to the investors, his smile rigid. "We'll have this resolved momentarily." Marcus tried to SSH into the core servers. "Permission denied. It's not even accepting root." "That's impossible," someone said. "Root always has access." "Not anymore. Look," he shared his screen. Every attempt to elevate privileges returned the same message: license holder authorization required, Heartline Compliance, LLC. 7 minutes. Whitcomb was on the phone with outside counsel, reading directly from the contract. "The clause is airtight. Without Hart's signature, we have no legal pathway to system access." "So get her signature." Kessler slammed his hand on the table. "She has no obligation to provide it. We terminated her. The license holder has sole discretion over access rights." The innovation team tried everything. SQL injection blocked, buffer overflow caught. They even attempted to physically pull drives from the servers, only to discover the data was encrypted with keys that surprise required license holder authorization to decrypt. 5 minutes. The investor call was deteriorating. One of the participants, a pension fund manager from Toronto, asked, "Is your trading system currently operational?" Porter couldn't lie with the dashboard visible. "We're performing maintenance. During market hours, during our scheduled demonstration." "These things happen in technology," Porter said weakly. Another investor, this one from Singapore, was more direct. "How much of your AUM is currently accessible?" The answer was 0. But Porter couldn't say that. Aegis 390 managed $390 million that might as well have been on Mars for all the good it did them now. 3 minutes. Kessler grabbed a keyboard himself, as if his executive title might carry some weight in the digital realm. He tried to create a new super user account. The system responded. Violation recorded. Time reduced. The countdown jumped. 90 seconds. "Stop touching things," Whitcomb shouted. "Every attempt makes it worse." But it was too late. Sky had tried one last desperate move, a forced restart of the entire risk orchestrator service. The system interpreted this as an attack. 30 seconds. The war room fell silent except for the hum of servers and the distant sound of Porter apologizing to investors. Everyone watched the countdown like it was New Year's Eve in reverse, counting down to midnight at noon. 10 seconds. "There has to be something," Kessler started. 5 seconds. "Maybe if we—" Sky reached for the keyboard. 3. 2, 1. Every screen in the building went black for a heartbeat. Then, in crisp white text on dark backgrounds, a new message appeared. Compliance freeze complete. All trading operations suspended. All administrative access revoked. Data integrity preserved. For system recovery. Contact license holder, Heartline Compliance LLC. The investor meeting screen showed Porter's desktop a dashboard full of zeros, no positions, no activity, no access. $390 million in assets, perfectly preserved, completely untouchable. In the coffee shop, I watched the public API feed confirm what I already knew. Aegis 390 had flatlined. Not crashed, that would imply an error. This was a perfectly executed stop, like pulling the power cord on a machine, except the cord was made of legal agreements and cryptographic signatures. I pulled up the Illinois Secretary of State website and updated my LLC's contact information, adding a simple note. Available for consulting engagements, minimum contract $500,000, plus full system ownership transfer, serious inquiries only. 9 minutes. That's all it took. 9 minutes to stop a $390 million operation, using nothing but the infrastructure they'd begged me to build, and the authority they'd forgotten to take away. I closed my laptop and ordered another coffee. My phone was still off, but I knew it was accumulating messages like a hurricane gathering force. They'd told me to do less. This was less. Absolutely nothing. In fact, the emergency board meeting convened at 2 p.m. in the executive conference room. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Lake Michigan stretched gray and indifferent, matching the mood inside. The investor call had ended in disaster, 3 major funds requesting immediate documentation about asset accessibility, 2 threatening to pull their allocations entirely. The board chairman, Walter Morrison, a 70-year-old former Goldman partner who'd seen every type of crisis Wall Street could manufacture, sat at the head of the table looking at the frozen dashboard still displayed on the main screen. "Explain to me," he said slowly, "how a former employee controls our entire trading operation." Whitcomb had prepared a presentation, but Morrison waved it away. Plain English. "She built it. She licensed it through her own company. We never transferred ownership. And we fired her because—" Kessler started to speak, but Morrison cut him off with a look that could freeze mercury. "I wasn't asking you, Graham." Porter cleared his throat. "We were restructuring toward a more innovation-focused approach." Innovation. Morrison tasted the word like spoiled wine. "Your innovation team has had 6 hours to innovate a solution. Where are we?" Sky, who'd been dragged into the meeting, looked like they hadn't slept in days despite it being the same afternoon. "The system is perfectly locked. Every access point requires cryptographic signatures we don't possess. We could try to break the encryption, but how long? With current technology, years, maybe decades." Morrison turned his attention to the legal team. "Can we sue?" "For what?" Whitcomb spread her hands. She followed every protocol, documented every change. The system is working exactly as specified in contracts we signed. If anything, she could sue us for attempting unauthorized access to her licensed infrastructure. The room fell silent. $390 million, frozen not by hackers or regulators or market crashes, but by a single person following the rules they'd written and ignored. Morrison's phone buzzed. He read the message, then looked directly at Kessler. "That was Citadel. They're pulling their entire allocation if we don't have trading capabilities restored by market open tomorrow." "We need to negotiate with Hart," Porter said. "With what leverage?" Morrison asked. "She has our infrastructure, she has legal standing, she has our $390 million locked in a box only she can open. What exactly do we have?" Nobody answered. Morrison stood. "Whitcomb, draft a consulting agreement. Whatever she wants. Kessler, you're suspended pending review. Porter, you better pray she's feeling merciful. This meeting is adjourned." As the board filed out, Kessler grabbed Whitcomb's arm. "There has to be another way." She pulled free. It was called respecting the person who built your critical infrastructure. That option expired when you told her to do less. At 4:17 p.m., my phone finally powered on to 47 missed calls, 93 text messages, and 22 voicemails. I deleted them all without reading or listening. There was only one message that mattered, and it came at 4:41 p.m. from Whitcomb's official Voltark email. Ms. Hart, Voltark Markets would like to engage Heartline Compliance LLC for emergency consulting services. We are prepared to meet your previously stated terms, $500,000, immediate payment plus full transfer of risk orchestrator ownership to Voltark upon successful system restoration. Please respond at your earliest convenience. I waited exactly 1 hour before replying. Contract required before any work begins. Full payment in advance. Non-negotiable. The signed contract arrived at 6:12 p.m., along with confirmation of a wire transfer. $500,000 for what would take me less than 5 minutes to fix updating a configuration file and transferring license ownership. I logged into the risk orchestrator at 6:30 p.m. Every log, every metric, every frozen transaction exactly where it should be. Perfect preservation. Like insects in amber. I updated the license authority, reset the access controls, and restored full functionality. At 6:35 p.m., Aegis 390 roared back to life. $390 million flowing through the markets again like nothing had happened. I sent one final email to Whitcomb. System restored, ownership transferred, consulting engagement complete. Please note for your records your former Director of Risk Architecture performed exactly as requested. I did less. Heartline Compliance LLC, however, did exactly what was necessary. They'd wanted me to do less, so I did nothing while my system did everything exactly what it was designed to do when someone forgot that infrastructure isn't just technology. It's people. And when you tell those people they don't matter, sometimes they take you at your word. The most elegant revenge isn't destruction, it's demonstrating, with surgical precision, the exact value of what someone took for granted. 9 minutes, $500,000, one lesson they'd never forget. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment, and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts on what you would have done in Riley's situation. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share more stories with you.